Dear colleagues and the audience who have come to attend our webinar, I welcome you to the webinar. My name is Dagogo Wokoma. I'll be a moderator. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Yes. We have our webinar today is titled, the theme is Nurturing Future Leaders Through School-Based Peace Education. So we have three speakers for this webinar. The first speaker will be Dr. Edward J. Brantmeier. Edward is a professor in the Learning, Technology, and Leadership Education Department and Assistant Director, Scholarship Program of the Center for Faculty Innovation at James Madison University, United States of America. He is going to speak on school-based sustainable peace leadership education, nurturing ideas for the 7th generation. May I please welcome Professor Edward to speak.
Dagogo, thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. I want to start by saying thank you for the organizers for organizing this. I understand technology is challenged and strained, yet I'm really admiring how we're still able to connect across cultures and continents and places within Africa, within the United States, and I'm sure there are folks from various countries around the world, a few folks from different countries as well. So I'm honored to be here and look forward to having a brief conversation with you. I have 15 minutes, I was told, and normally I suppose this would take 3 days, and the format would be we'd have a roundtable and we'd discuss these ideas and we would share, because to be quite honest with you, I know nothing about a Nigerian educational context. I do know what I know, and I know what I don't know. This is a paraphrase of Confucius, and I do know that most of my work has been in the context of the United States, also a bit in India, Cyprus, and also recently in Austria. So my frame is limited. So today I'll present some of the stuff that I know, which is sustainable peace education, and the potential for developing peace leaders in schools. But that's all context. That's all context dependent. So here's a picture of me here in my institution, James Madison. I wanted to give you a little geolocation. The A here is in the state of Virginia, in the country of the United States. We're pretty close to Washington, D.C., but our environment is nothing like Washington, D.C. We're tucked in the Shenandoah Valley, which is a little agricultural oasis about 2 hours south of Washington, D.C. So that's where I'm coming from. So a beautiful question to ponder today, and also lifelong. How might sustainable peace leadership that embodies healthy ecosystems, social equity, in the creation of viable economies actualize a better world where all human beings and the natural world can live and prosper with dignity? So it's a big question, right? How might sustainable peace leadership create an ideal world? And basically that's what I'm talking about today. So the learning outcomes for this brief presentation, hopefully we together will understand peace education in terms of text, context, and subtext. I like to start with definitions. It's one of the big things in the field that I've done over the years. What are we saying when we mean peace, or peace education, or violence, or sustainable peace? We'll explore sustainable peace leadership to that social equity, healthy environmental ecosystems, and sustainability, viable economies lens, or sustainable economy lens. That is, of course, United Nations Education for Sustainable Development framework. And we'll look at elements, and that will be the folks who are from Nigeria in this context or other locations. How does some of this practice, and how do some of these ideas apply to your situated context? And we'll talk about critical peace education, which is a situated, rooted notion that violence is nested in particular context, and perhaps those from the outside can't really see or understand what's going on, and therefore how does grassroots change take place in the context of cultivating peace leaders in school-based peace education. So the agenda, how are we going to do all that? We'll talk about theory of sustainable peace, peace education, and then end with allostasis in education. What is allostasis? We'll talk about that in a little bit. I wanted to share what I normally do with my students and also faculty members and some of the various workshops I do. I talk about this theory of sustainable peace. It comes from this book right here, the International Handbook of Holistic Education, which is a really interesting resource. In there, I published a chapter on sustainable peace for the planet, and I talk about this theory right here, a theory of sustainable peace. How are we to create positive relations if we don't take care of ourselves and cultivate that inner sustainable energy for the long haul? That ripples into our relations, that ripples into our roles as institutional change actors, as peace leaders or sustainable peace leaders in the context in which we operate. We, in some instances, enact policy, in some instances, create policy and practice in that context. We have various people. We said we had a president of university, maybe school leaders, maybe teachers, thinking about you as an institutional change agent, implementing practice and policy for sustainable peace in your context. And of course, our institutions comprise society, and the whole thing is wrapped with a macro education for sustainable development framework, of course, that embodies that healthy ecosystems, viable economies, as well as social equity. So how do we, so that's the theory right there. A lot of times I start my presentations, I don't have time today, with quiet centering, because how do we cultivate inner sustainable peace? So I invite you for a moment to just take a breath. Take a deep breath, breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. Simply breathing, just breathing. As I often say, in this moment, there's nothing more to do but simply breathe. Just breathe. So the purpose of that is cultivating the inner sustainable energy that has the potential to ripple into our relations. And I talk about quiet centering as a power tool amid COVID realities, the COVID pandemic, quadruple pandemic of economic crisis, health crisis, racial crisis in the context of the United States for sure, and climate change. So this idea, how do we cultivate inner sustainable energy for the long haul in the work that we do? And when I work with sustainable peace leaders, my students and faculty members and educational leaders, I teach local Virginia school leaders, their teachers who are studying to become principals. We talk about how are you going to create space so that you make wise decisions that are inclusive and that are connected to the realities in your schooling context. What do you do to take care of yourself, and where do those decisions arise from? So I wanted to give a definition of sustainable peace. Nolet and Wheeler talk about sustainable peace and education for sustainable development in the context of teacher education. They talk about it in terms of people, planet, profit. Of course, this is the United Nations Sustainable Development Framework, where you have a healthy environment, equitable society, and vibrant economies. And of course, these are ideals that we're reaching toward, amid realities that are quite challenging at present, and quite frankly, have always been challenging. So that's sustainable peace. When I talk about peace education, I talk about, often use Harris and Morrison's definition, education for the elimination of direct and indirect forms of violence. So how do we cultivate leaders who can help eliminate direct and indirect violence? And of course, direct violence is war and or hitting somebody else. Indirect forms of violence are psychological intimidation and also structural violence, how the world economy is arranged so that it privileges some and excludes others. Jing Lin, my colleague at the University of Maryland, and I defined peace education not only as the elimination of direct, but also what replaces it. So that generative aspect of peace education that can generate new knowledge paradigms, connected relationships, institutional processes, and social structures. So we envision a new and we actualize a future, in some cases that does exist, and in other cases that does not exist yet. And we have to co-create that in our work together. So my work in social justice is combined with a critical peace education approach. And if you look at the citations, I've been doing this work for a bit of time now, 12, 15, 20 years. But I really focus what I do and others in the field of critical peace education on transforming relationships and structures that perpetuate differentials in power, access, and meaningful participation in decision-making. And the reason at the time that we added that to the conversation on peace education, and other people have done this as well, we're not original in doing this, but this idea, if you promote conflict resolution, interpersonal conflict resolution, you may not be equipping peace leaders in schools with the power to transform their relationships and the critical thinking skills that they may need to contest how power operates and who is getting access or who's being denied access to food, water, medicine, basic education, etc. As a Fulbright scholar in India in 2009, I was at the Mojisola Center for Peace Research at Banaras Hindu University, and my colleague, Dr. Manoj Mishra and Dr. Priyanka Upadhyay were having conversations, and I realized for me that peace education can be the peace of clean water. It can be the peace of medicine when you're sick. It can be the peace of adequate housing, right? So I think it's really important to include social justice efforts and deconstruct issues of power, access, and who gets to call the shots, who gets say in the political process. It's beyond basic conflict resolution skills. I have 5 minutes left and so much more to go. So some of the approaches that I've used in the past that I think would apply to school-based sustainable peace leadership is involving folks in consciousness raising, influenced by Gandhi, imagining nonviolent alternatives, and that's Elise Boulding's imaging, providing specific modes of empowerment in the context of Freire's practice approach, engaging in transformative action and reflection. And these are not my original ideas. In my early scholarship, I've been influenced by Betty Reardon, Paulo Freire, Elise Boulding, and others, Mahatma Gandhi and others. And this was my attempt to kind of coalesce Praxis approach. So in short, critical peace education, that approach is power analysis plus engaged change equals vibrant, sustainable peace. So it's a simple equation that's pretty complex, rooted in the article in 2013 toward a critical peace education for sustainability in the International Journal of Peace Education. So when we're thinking about schools, I think this is the most important part right here, and I have 4 minutes left. Maybe I can have a minute or two longer. I'm not sure if we do have that time, but I sure want to cut in on other instructors. When we
have extra 5 minutes.
Extra 5 minutes, okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Extra 5 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Extra 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll add that on. So so we talk about peace as text in schools. We can ask basic questions. Like get students and teachers as peace leaders in those contexts, in those school-based contexts, to ask questions. Well, whose voices are heard and not heard in the curriculum? What's being taught in math from whose perspective, or in social studies, whose history is being taught? Who are the voices of the authors, right? Michael Apple has a book, Ideology and Curriculum, and the idea there is that there's an official knowledge of the state that is perpetuated through public school curriculum, sometimes private school curriculum as well, and whose voice is included. So we need to examine power in those contexts. We also, who are the educators themselves as the body text, meaning that who are the teachers in schools and are they modeling sustainable peace leadership? Do the teachers represent students that are being served in the schooling context? And if so, great. And if not, how do we change that dynamic in the context of the United States? I know we are trying to diversify the predominantly white middle-class female teaching force that is in elementary schools, and at the secondary schools that flops in terms of gender. But how do we diversify our teaching force so that young kids see leaders doing the work of being educators in schools and mirroring those students. So we need to check for diverse students and community representation in this conversation about peace as text, and also content. This is about lived curriculum, peace as text. How is the violence and the peace of children and youth, how is their world part and integrated into the school curriculum? Thinking of potential topics, lessons, or units that we could teach rooted in community in the personal life of our students. We talk about that in our 2020 book on pedagogy of vulnerability, which talks about the lived curriculum and how we integrate our own lived curriculum and use that as a teaching tool as instructors, and also inviting students and community knowledge as part of learning into the school system as culturally responsive teaching. Also thinking about peace as context pedagogy. How does one peacefully teach? These are a lot of big ideas. I understand that, but what is the teacher to student or teacher to students interaction? Is that dialogical? Is it egalitarian? Or is it banking model, which Freire talks about depositing knowledge into students? So pedagogy matters when we think about cultivating sustainable peace leaders in schools. How is discipline enacted in schools? Do we punish negatively, punishment and shame, or is it restoratively? How can we as a community understand that harm was committed, come together, voice what harm has been committed, and find a collective solution to restorative justice? I think of a lot of the attempts at truth and reconciliation committees around the world, which could be seen as a form of restorative practice. Also assessment, how does one peacefully assess learning? Is that aligned? What is being taught and how it's being taught, is that aligned with how it's being measured? I call this peaceful learning or peaceful assessment. Is the purpose of learning to know and master knowledge, or to be tricked, separating those who have knowledge and do not have knowledge? And so this is a big conversation in assessment. It's also related to how we teach and what we feel is an important purpose of school, to master knowledge, the assumption that all learners can master knowledge, or only that a few privileged learners can get the A's and the rest must get F's. And so it's really about our assessment, and that shapes the context of peace in schools. And if we think about the peace as subtext, right? What are the hidden curriculum? What is the hidden curriculum? The hidden messages sent via informal rules and regulations in schools. That's super important and kind of hard to get at sometimes, right? What about the physical environment? Are schools resourced well? And I know this varies from context to context in the United States, in India, in Cyprus, some of the places that I've worked in. And this is, of course, I'm sure, different in Nigeria as well. So the culture of power, what dominant cultural norms operate in terms of peace as subtext of the schools? Values, behaviors, and thought patterns are being enacted in schools. Is this just, fair, and inclusive? And in my course, we're reading in the United States, A Multiplication is for White People by Lisa Delpit, Raising Expectations for Other People's Children. And her main claim is that there's a culture of power in operation in the white middle class majority, and that gets enacted in schools. And if you do not belong, you are relegated to the margins in that schooling environment, and could have a disadvantage, and do have a disadvantage systemically in terms of the dominant cultural norms. So is the question there, is that just, fair, and inclusive? And again, are the multicultural worlds and realities of our students represented in the subtext of the school, also the text and context? And then peace as policy, we have to look at the policies that govern and influence what the practice is done on a day-to-day basis in schools. So I asked the question, what school district, state, and federal policies might support violence and or peace? So we examine it from the macro policy level as well to understand the day-to-day interactions of teachers, students, and educational leaders, principals, headmasters in school systems. So I want to take a breath here and think about the future a little bit. And the question here, or the statement, is about allostasis, this idea of how do we anticipate and predict an unknown and changing future, right? How do we anticipate and predict and be responsive to an unknown and changing future? In the concept of health, work by Peter Sterling at the University of Pennsylvania. He wrote this book recently, What is Health? It's called Allostasis and the Evolution of Human Design. And I've been working with Peter and others to think about how this applies to educational context. So these are new ideas that I'm playing with here. But how do we anticipate and predict and respond to an unknown and changing future in the context of climate change, in the context of rampant structural racism, in the context of economic crisis, in the context of global health pandemic? How do we anticipate and predict what is needed in terms of sustainable peace leadership? How do we cultivate those capacities, the values, the behaviors, the critical thinking skills necessary to do that work? And I was inspired by this quote. I have no idea who said it. It was a participant at James Madison University in Cultivating the Globally Sustainable Self Summit in 2015. And I'm sure somebody famous once said this, but I don't know who. I just heard it, and then I always refer back to that participant. The future already exists. It's just unequally distributed. To me, that's profound. The future already exists. It's just unequally distributed. So the questions that I have about a Nigerian context and other contexts from around the world, what future already exists in your context, and how can that be amplified? How are schools positively solving some of the challenges of violence, of both direct and indirect in a Nigerian context? And then I call in the work of Elise Boulbine, what opportunities and challenges exist to creating an ideal future? And calling on the work of Peter Sterling, how might an allostatic principle of optimal responsiveness, how do we optimally respond and recreate health? Not only recreate, that seems like the past, or generate and co-create health of the future, be used. How can we be optimally responsive to anticipate what is needed in the decades to come? This is not a Nigerian problem. This is a global problem that has its roots in a Nigerian educational context, that has its roots in my home country, the United States, focusing on issues of the perennial problems, of the wicked problems of our time: climate change, human health, social diversity and stability, and sustainable economies. What future already exists, and how can that be amplified? So I was inspired by Anwar al-Chaudhry at the United Nations at a Peace Leadership Summit in 2003 in New York City. And I asked him, culture of peace for the culture of peace framework, the culture of peace for and nonviolence for children of the world, that decade. Very ideal and lofty, fantastic, I love it. But what can I do? And he said, you can do things on 3 levels: your personal life and how you interact. How do you create a culture of peace in your personal life? He also said, you have professional influence. Where do you operate? What is your role as an educator or a leader or a citizen in civic society? And then how do we participate in civic society, the political processes that create policy, the allocation of values through the distribution of social goods? That's a Timball, not a Timball, but a Ball definition. How do we create in civic society to shape policies, or the quote, the allocation of values through the distribution of social goods to influence the generation of a culture of peace? And I'll leave you with this photo for a second. Maybe you can just take that in for a moment. What does that vibrant, sustainable peace look like as we cultivate leaders in schools in Nigeria, in the United States, in other countries that are represented by members of this group from around the world? So thank you. And thank you for the extra time.
Thanks, Ed. Dagogo, are you there? Thanks, Eddie, for that wonderful presentation, taking us through, the beginning of this webinar. We thank you, Ed. And Dagogo, if you're not there, I'll just call on.
I'm there. I'm sorry.
Okay. Please go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, Ed, we thank you so much for making time to give us this beautiful lecture. We are very grateful. The next speaker will be Mojisola Ogundiran. Moji, are you there?
I think she has just gone out.
Oh.
Okay, while we wait for her, I can just give a very brief presentation on nurturing peace leaders while we wait for her to come in. Okay, she's in. Moji is here. Go ahead, Moji.
Moji? Hello,
Yes.
Moji, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, a brief introduction. Mojisola Ogundero is the founder of United Network of Youth for Peace and Diplomacy. Our organization promotes peace, education, and non-violent behavior among young men and women. Mojisola works in partnership with Sustainable Development Goals, Thursdays, and the Thursdays Working Group on Women, Youth, Peace, and Security in West Africa and Sahel to localize the Goal 16 of the Sustainable Development Goals in Nigeria. Mojisola, you are welcome. Please take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dagogo. Kind of like sorry about the noise first. I'm actually caught up somewhere. But then I'm to speak on emotional intelligence. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm to speak on the emotional intelligence as a tool for peace building in schools. And for me, I would like to make this thing participatory. I know we've been listening to our first speakers, and then I can see a lot of people on the participant list. So I would just kind of like ask anybody who wants to kind of like talk, just to tell us what do you understand by emotional intelligence, and why is emotional intelligence lacking in school? I want this kind of like a discussion to be participatory as much as possible. So I would just like participants to just kind of tell me what they know about emotional intelligence and why is it lacking in our schools. Who wants to take the floor and speak to us? Just like in few seconds, just to tell us. Yeah, I was just thinking maybe we can make it participatory, but then I would have loved maybe like anybody can just kind of give their own opinion about emotional intelligence and why it's lacking in our schools, in Nigerian schools particularly. Before I kind of like give my own introduction, if I can wait for a few seconds, if anybody wants to speak.
I know I don't know about, this is Ed Brantmeier. I know I don't know about the Nigerian context, but you know, being aware of the body, the thoughts and the connections to the emotions, it's difficult work, right? And so I know that social emotional intelligence, it's even something that some people in the United States don't want to talk about so much because we think school is about knowing and doing, but rather than feeling. So I think that's my contribution to you.
Okay, thank you very much for that contribution. Thank you. And any other person wants to like try, any Nigerian on the participant list that wants to kind of give their own thoughts on emotional intelligence or emotional management? Yeah. Okay, so I'll just then go right into my own topic. Emotional management actually is the ability to understand and manage your own emotions, basically able to understand and manage your emotions. So the components of emotional management or emotional intelligence is actually the first one is self-awareness. That's like you being able to being conscious of your own feelings and motives. So that's one of the the components, the major components of emotional intelligence. You being able to be conscious of your own feelings and motive. So another component of emotional intelligence is self-regulation. That is having the ability to be able to pause and think. So most people like if you can able to like pause and think before you do things, you actually have some level of emotional intelligence or emotional management in you. So when you see people acting out of impulses, then you can say that they do not have emotional intelligence. Another component of emotional intelligence is motivation. Is motivation. That is having focus, looking at the big picture, having focus in what you do. You don't just act because of today, but you are thinking broadly. You are looking at tomorrow. You are thinking of the future when you act. That's another component of emotional intelligence. Empathy is also a very big component of emotional intelligence. Having the ability to not to be self-centered, you know, to be able to show good listening skills, to be able to show understanding of people's needs and wants. That's another component of emotional intelligence. Then the last one that I will give as a major component of emotional intelligence is ability to cooperate and work with teams. So you are just not like isolated, but you are working with people. So when we bring this down to the the school context now, you can look at it and say that students actually, it's very important for students to have this component of emotional intelligence, because it's what helps them to be able to uh, uh, perform very well in their academics. Students helps them to give them the ability to control and positively express themselves. Um, when students are not able to like control their emotions, then we begin to see a lot of rising cases in maybe like bullying, in physical attack, when you see students peer fighting, students are fighting. We kind of even see that to some extent students are now like joining different cult groups and all, because they are not able to think of their action, how to reflect, to have self-reflection of their actions. So emotional intelligence is highly important for students because it helps them to become self-aware. Like I said, it helps them to become self-aware of their emotions and give them ability to also control their own behavior. Particularly students in the primary and secondary school, that is like the K-12, need emotional management to deal with stress. They need emotional management to deal with stress, uh, and also to be able to handle the transition stage. Because when we look at schools, when we look at students, when we look at students in the primary and secondary school, you can see that they are mostly teenagers, and they are also transitioning from teenagehood to adulthood. So they are going through a lot of stress. They are going through a lot of change in their biology and all. So which can also mean that they may be experiencing stress, but intelligence, emotional, able to hold themselves together and act positively. So one thing that I can say that emotional intelligence help young people, what is needed in school is also because for students to be able to handle negative emotions that can come out of maybe like failure in classes, and when they understand that failure is just a lesson, ability to withstand and the emotions that comes with failure is very, very important for students. I'll just go to this that says, according to UNICEF report, according to UNICEF report, half of students within the age of 15 to 13, within the age of 13 to 15 years old, experience peer violence in schools, and 3 in 5 students experience bullying and physical fighting also in school. So that can show you that with this statistic, that a lot of violence is happening within the school. The school is no longer safe like for children to go and study and learn, because there is so much violence happening. whether there's peer violence, whether there is bullying. A lot of things are happening. And UNICEF has also given the report that students between the age of 13 to 15 years old experience some level of violence within the school. So that shows that students, we need to begin to teach that culture of peace among students. And one way to teach that culture of peace is by talking to them about emotional management, how they can handle their emotions. And which is very, very important. There is a nexus. There is a nexus between emotional intelligence, academic achievement, and also safe school. When students are able to, manage their emotions positively, most of them perform very well in school, in their academics, because they're able to set achievement, personal academic goals for themselves. And when they're able to also perform very well in school, they have this enthusiasm, they have positive motivations. The school environment also becomes a safe place for students to to play around and learn. And also because if they're able to manage their emotions very well, it also helps them to like it also helps them to be their behavior. It shows in their behavior. They're able to properly behave in school. So these are some of the things that I'm going to share about emotional intelligence. And for me, I have suggestions as to how can we develop emotional management or intelligence among students. The first thing I will say is that it should be curriculum based. Emotional management should be taught. It should be part of the curriculum that will be taught in school. Students, just the way they teach them mathematics, English, students should also be taught emotional intelligence, the different components of emotional intelligence, particularly empathy. They should be taught this, and also students should help students to find their personality traits, which is very important. Your personality trait. Many people don't know their personality trait. Even the adults don't know their personality trait. So there are 5 types of personality traits. The first one is accommodating. The second one is collaborating.
Please conclude. You can just have 2 minutes to conclude.
Okay. So they should have understand their personality trait, accommodating, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, and competitive. So these are the personality traits that we have. People need to understand their personality traits in order for them to be able to undo their emotions very well. And also be encouraged to practice mindfulness and mediation, which is very important. Mindfulness and mediation will help students to overcome negative emotions and become more self-aware of their own actions and the life they want to live. So these are some of the things that I have which is very important. Like I will just say it again. The first one is that emotional intelligence should be curriculum based. They should be taught in school. The second one is that students should be able to know their personality traits. Teachers should help students to know their personality trait. What is their personality trait? And then the third one is that students should be able to practice mindfulness and mediation, which will help them to identify negative emotions and overcome negative emotions like sadness, failure, and insecurity that may come as part of the teenagehood that they are currently undergoing. So these are some of my own thoughts about emotional intelligence. I welcome any questions or comments. I'll be here to answer them. Yeah, Mr. Collins, you can have this. Hello.
Yeah, Dagogo, over to you. The moderator is Mr. Dagogo. Oh, okay.
Moji, thank you so much for your presentation. It's quite revealing, and you make recommendation of developing emotional intelligence through a curriculum-based approach, personality traits, and mindfulness. That's a task for teachers and curriculum builders to look into. Once more, I say thank you so much for your beautiful presentation. Please, Dr. Collins, you may have to come in at this point.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dagogo. Let me see if I can share my screen and just let me see what I can do. Just hold on, please. Sometimes technology can be a little bit challenging. So thanks, Moji, for your very good presentation. What I would like to just talk briefly, just maybe just about 10 minutes, is to talk about how can we develop peace leaders through peace camp. So I'll just talk briefly about a project we have been doing for the past 15 years in Nigeria. It's a project where we bring young persons, into a peace camp for 1 week. We've been doing that for the past 15 years. So what I'm going to share with you today is the experiences of these young persons. So what I'll be sharing with you today is the experiences of these young persons, who have been participating in our peace camp for the past 5 years. So this, for the past 5 years. Oops, okay, good. So the network, the Nigerian Network and Campaign for Peace Education, which is the group, that is arranging this webinar, was established in 2019. The intention of the Nigerian Network and Campaign for Peace Education is to bring practitioners in peace building and peace education together. The idea is to create a vision of a learning community where we're able to learn together. So today we're happy to have Eddie with us, sharing with us wonderful experience in terms of how we can actually, practice peace education. So we're happy to have Eddie. This is part of what we've been doing, in the Nigerian Network and Campaign for Peace Education. We've also had, last month, we had a webinar where we had guests from Kenya, from the US, and also Nigeria, sharing their experience in terms of how can young people participate in peace education. So today we're continuing in that series. And what I'll try to share with you is the work the Center for Social Transformation and Human Development have been doing with Konrad Adenauer Foundation. As a matter of fact, in 2007, the United States Institute of Peace were part of the sponsors for this project. So 2007, 2008, the United States Institute for Peace funded this project. In 2009, National Endowment for Democracy, also in the US, we're also part of those who sponsored this project. So now, what is this about? My presentation will be structured, in about, 6 ways. Introduction, what is the rationale? What is the theoretical framework and our theory of change? And I'll give you some data from our survey, and then we'll talk about the experience of these young persons, in our program. One, talk about introduction. There is an African proverb that says, if you don't know where the rain starts falling on you, you might not be able to know who gave you shelter. There was this story of a young man, it was raining in the forest, and the man was running helter-skelter looking for shade, and then he saw a hut. And in this hut, there was an old man. And then he went into the hut. The old man was, with a little fire warming himself. And the young man said, please, sir, can I join you to warm myself? And the old man, happy, said, please join me. And the young man sat down with the old man, and they were telling stories, warming themselves. And then the old man asked him, where did the rain start falling on you? And the young man said, I can't remember. And the old man sent the guy out, said, leave. And everybody, the young man was shocked. I said, leave my hut. The young man said, why? He said, if you don't know where the rain starts falling on you, you might not likely remember who gave you shelter. So it's also important to be aware of where we're coming from. So when we look at the Nigerian context, we need to look at what is the situation of Nigeria that makes it very imperative that we need to take peace education very serious. We have so much conflict in Nigeria, some of them based on long-standing issues of abuse of human rights, environmental rights, the issue of social and economic. Now we're talking of, Stop SARS. That's the protest that's been going on in Nigeria for the past 1 week. It's all part of this whole social and economic issues. Then we have the issue of underdevelopment. And then even though government have been doing a lot, things are not still it is what it should be. And this has led to all kinds of conflict. And then why do we want to work with young people? Because we believe young people are the future. So our project is titled Protect Our Future Peace and Civic Education Project. And we feel that if young people learn the skill of peace and civic education, they will be, in a position to do what? To change those within their sphere of influence. So we talk about raising awareness on human rights, social justice among young persons. So these young persons will now turn and do what? Train others within their spheres of influence. While young people, I've already said, they're part of the bigger society. And again, young persons are both the victims and what? The perpetrators of violence. So if you want to stop violence, one way you can do it is to do what? Work with these young people who are both the victims. Because if they appreciate that violence is not acceptable, they'll be more key to do what? To stop the violence. And now what is the theoretical framework in which of what we do and what is our theory of change? Spice 2006 said, change is in the first place a personal or individual matter. A changed individual have the potential and responsibility to influence relationship, subsystem, system, policies, institutions, and transformative framework. What are we talking about? Our process starts that change starts with the individual. So when the individual is changed, this individual then now changes those within their sphere of influence, and at the end of the day, what happened? The society is changed. Another approach we use is what we call the healthy relationship and connection theory, the contact theory. This focuses on that change occurs when people, appreciate each other, then isolation is broken down. You see, if young persons, if young persons are empowered and convinced that democracy is possible and they're able to live within themselves, because for 1 week, these young persons are together in one place, they're able to understand themselves, then there will be changes in the society. We structure our project in terms of it creates awareness first, leading to behavioral change, and therefore change in the broader community. So what happens? The change comes first by the awareness, and then the behavior, and then the society. We try to look at our program within the John Paul Latourette model. John Paul Latourette talks about the levels of the actors in peace building. And we locate our own approach within the grassroots. This is where local peacemakers, where we have grassroots training in order to have changes. So our level, people might say, but what you're doing in the grassroots, how is it going to affect the big picture? But our emphasis is not on the top political, religious, military leaders. Our focus is just on the grassroots level. So these are some of the data we collected where we try to find out what are the perception of young persons. But I won't bother you with all those. What I'll try to do is just to tell you some of the experience of these young persons that attended the peace camp. I'll give you one from Abraham Patience. Abraham Patience is from Community Secondary School, Aboloma. Abraham said, she said, my peace camp experience is truly a great one. It would be an understatement to say it was nice because it is one experience I won't forget in a hurry. My peace camp experience did not only widen my knowledge, but it also gave me another orientation about life. Living in the midst of students from different backgrounds really helped me know and see life from others' point of view. You see, here, she's talking about the contact theory. She's talking about the relationship theory. That when you live together, it changes the way you see world. The lectures were really so refreshing, giving me a reason to resolve to stand out for peace, even if I'm standing alone. My stay here, I could boldly say, was not wasted and will not be wasted at all. So these are some, what Abraham Patience talked about, her experience attending a peace camp. there's a whole lot of experience, but I won't want to take a lot of your time. I'll just probably take 2 or 3 and then just conclude. Here, Chijoke Hillary was saying, I love the peace camp because it gave me opportunity to learn so many skills, including peace building, conflict resolution skill, and civic education. You know, here we're talking about the issue of awareness, the knowledge. So now Hillary has been able to learn, and then he can now be able to take this to the SUA community. James Princeton said, my peace camp experience when I sighting and trailing one, because I had the opportunity to learn more about peace and how to resolve conflict. You know, there's a whole lot of experience here. And then Glory said, the most important thing is that I accomplished my reason for coming to camp. It is the first time in my life to attend a program like this that taught me how to make peace. I think the important thing we're saying here is that young persons are appreciating the need for peace building. Because at times, people might just see, oh, we can't, we're how do I put it? We're powerless. What we're trying to do in a peace camp is to empower people to believe that even though you're young, you have the power to change society. Then the last slide is, Divine said, my stay at the peace camp was golden. It's so golden that I can't lose it or lose the next opportunity to come back and learn the different phases of conflict and how to handle them. Henry said, I love this camp. I wish I wouldn't go back. If I have the opportunity to come again, I'll be the happiest person in the world. If it's possible to increase the days, it will be better. I'm in tears for leaving this peace camp. You see, the peace camp was such, a very positive experience for the young persons, because it's an opportunity where in an atmosphere of friendship and solidarity, people are able to learn from each other. People are able to support each other. This is talking about, we have 100 young persons in this camp for a whole week. And they were supporting themselves. They were doing everything together. They divided themselves into groups. There's a group that cleaned the rooms, the group that cleans the class, everything, serving food. It was just a beauty, and it's such empowering that when they left, they go back to their various schools to start Peace Club. And in those various schools, they become what? The vanguard of change, which we emphasize. The last thing about it is that on the Thursday of the peace camp, we normally take the students to the parliament. So they go to the parliament, to see how laws are made. We also take them to the high court to see how cases are adjudicated. So in case if you have conflict with somebody and you can't resolve it, you don't need to fight. You don't need to go to violence. You need to go to the court. So on a Thursday, we normally take the students, to peace, to the high court and the House of Assembly, for them to have that kind of experience. So I have experience from the people talking about their experience in terms of going to the high court. And then conclusion, there's a whole lot I can talk about this project, but we've taken so much time. It's just that the project imbibe on young people the skills for peaceful living. It starts with a change of attitude. As the young persons are able to change their attitude, they're able to change their mindset, and they're able to now go back to their communities. And then looking at those within their sphere of influence, their peers, and being able to change their peers. In the graph I didn't show you, it's just to tell you how the effect, how the various persons, in the schools are able to relate to what the Peace Club is doing. So this is just a brief telling about how do we nurture future leaders. We can nurture future leaders through peace education. And this is just one project where we bring this young person in a peace camp. In an atmosphere of friendship, in an atmosphere of solidarity, we teach them peace building and peace education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Colins Imoh, for this presentation. It has revealed a lot to us that the network can campaign for peace education does not only organize a webinar or seminar, but actually organize peace camps. I also have a peace club in my school. I coordinate a peace club. I would love my school to participate in the next edition whenever it comes. So thank you so much for.
Actually, just talking about it, I'll link you up to the people in charge because there's going to be a peace camp in November. You know, normally our peace camp is normally during the long vacation, but because of the COVID, we've not had it. So in fact, they're meeting today to decide when in November. You're just thinking within the break, you know, they're going to have it. So I'm going to link you up with the people involved so that you can talk to them.
Thank you so much. Now we are expecting questions from the audience, but I have only one question here that is available from, I think from Ashmit, Kaur. I'm sorry if I didn't call your name. I think that's an Indian. The question goes to Mojisola. Moji, are you there? Hello? Hello, Moji? Moji is not there. The question goes to us, what is the difference between emotions and feelings? That's the question. I think it's on for Moji. Moji is not here. Please let us have your question now. If you have more questions, we can be able to.
Yeah, Dagogo, you can also read some of the comments from the participants on the chat.
Yes, let me start here. This is from Michael Lawrence. So this is an interesting webinar, but I'm scheduled for another one. You do keep me in mind as you schedule additional webinars. And from Dr. Ed, he said, I really resonate with your advocacy for mindfulness meditation as a power tool for social emotional intelligence. Excellent. I think that is referring to Mojisola's presentation.
There's a question here from Eddie. He said, Colins and Mojisola, how do programs like Peace Camp and social emotional intelligence program make their way into the formal curriculum of schools in Nigeria, from additive programs to integrated programs that become the fabric and culture of schooling on the local and national level? Thanks, Eddie, for that question. I think, you know, the situation in Nigeria is that we're actually having a campaign at the moment where we're trying to campaign to actually have, you know, peace education as part of the curriculum. So we've not been successful in having peace education as part of the curriculum. So what we're doing in schools is having, you know, the peace camp and the peace club, you know, as an extra curriculum activity where students actually come together to learn peace building, peace education, and then be peer mediators for their fellow students. So that's what we've been trying to do in the schools. So in terms of having it as part of, you know, a formal curriculum, it's very difficult. The powers that be and the bureaucracy have not been very helpful in that. But we have a whole lot of campaign that we're doing, trying to get peace education in the forefront. You know, we're not yet there, but we hope that we might get there. Bridget is on this call, and I don't know if Bridget is still around, because in Lagos State, Bridget and her team are working with the State House of Assembly to see how they can enact a registration that will compel the schools to have peace education as part of a formal curriculum. So some states are already working on that line, you know, other states are not. We're hoping that if Lagos State succeed with what the civil societies are doing in Lagos, we can use that as a pilot to see how we can push it into other states to have peace education as a formal curriculum. Eddie, I don't know if that's helpful.
Yes, it's very helpful. I really appreciate that answer, and I think it's similar. I was typing a response. I oftentimes just type in the chat because I don't want to take up too much of the airway, but I was connecting what you said to Ashmit's comments about the resistance in an Indian context, and I'm just thinking about peace as political, and and when peace education is implemented, it can change societies and transform relationships. But there are power elites in most countries. I'm talking about the United States who want to suppress these conversations, and that's a very huge obstacle to integrative or transformative peace education in schools and creating sustainable peace leaders. I will have to say I tried to develop a master's program in sustainable peace leadership at my institution, and because of COVID and other things, but because of I didn't have success. I'll just put it that way. I don't want to get too critical, but a master's program that would train community, business, and educators to cultivate their sustainable peace leadership capacities and implement change in their given context. So what I'm hearing, Collins, is I'm just hearing I want to say a global narrative, but I do want to say that about the challenges of fully integrating peace education in schools. It's been a long battle for the past 20 years in my work in the context of the U.S. Because peace is considered politically suspect.
Yeah. Thanks, Eddie. I think you're right. It's the same thing all over the place. You know, it's real political. And then the question, Eddie, to you is that how do we as civil society navigate this political agenda to make sure we have peace education in school? What are suggestions you think we can do?
Yeah, I think there used to be a more simple answer, but but I don't know these days. I mean, my simple answer is, how is peace mutually beneficial to opposing parties and the power elite, right? How do we sell it and market it as mutually beneficial and integrative and helpful for schools? I know that in the U.S. context, restorative justice, a lot of that comes out of the work at Eastern Mennonite University, other places, but the restorative justice practices are pretty powerful, and they increase academic achievement, and they reduce in-school suspension and expulsion from all kids, but especially kids who are marginalized. And so how do we share the data to politicians who control the budgets and the monies that fund certain initiatives? How do we convince peace is a win-win situation? I say it's different now because everything seems upside down and sideways with a lot of twisted logic that happens these days. I don't think I answered your question, Collins. I'll think about it more.
Okay. No, thanks, Ed. I think that's quite fine. It's difficult, but I think that's a challenge. We as practitioners on the field, it's a question of a trade-off. How do we convince the powers that be that this is necessary? I think that's fine. That's right. So I'll hand over to Dagogo to please continue. If there are people that have questions or comment, if not, then we can round up the session. Dagogo, please. Okay, I think there's another comment here. Ashmate, you want to talk? You want to say something, or you're comfortable just write, your chat, just in case you want to say something? I think there's something. It's ironically, power elites in terms of elite school did not attend to political demands of education in that sense. Rather, the education is more attuned to high tuition fee-paying parents and smoother transition to universities abroad, reproducing allies. I think that's quite good. That's quite amazing. It's just a question of the status quo remaining. On whose benefit should we have peace education? I think that's quite a powerful contribution, because the whole issue is that for whose benefit? Why should we have peace education? If the powers that be are trying to repatriate themselves, then things will not change. But that's where the activists have to come in and say, you know what, we need to do something. Yeah, how school produces as far as social, political, and economic order. That's correct. You know, because actually, I think that's what Eddie tried to talk about is a political decision. You know, just like if you look at what happened in the U.S. during the confirmation of the the education secretary, there have to be a tie break. It shows how political it is. That is one of the the secretaries that people were so much against, and people start wondering why education. Because when you control the mind of the young people, you produce a system. So people need to understand how education is and why it is a lot political, that those who control the education, you control the minds of the young persons. So it's very important that we look at how do we nurture young persons, to be sure that we have the future we want. If there's no other comment, I think, if there's no other comment, okay, there's one from Ed. Peace can be used for passive suppression by political power elites. No? Thank you, Ashmit. So I thank everybody. I thank the Nigerian Network and Campaign for Peace Education. I thank the, Tony, and the International Institute for Peace Education for the support and collaboration for this webinar. We thank everybody. Most especially, we thank Eddie for agreeing to be part of this. Eddie, thank you very much. Your presentation, made this really educative and make it enlightening. Thank you, Moji. Thank you, everybody, for all your contribution and your patience. And we hope this is just the beginning of others. We've done this is the second webinar we're doing. We hope to have one monthly on different topics, and we'll be calling on all of you from time to time. So Eddie, if we call on you again, please, we know you're quite busy, but please, you have to you have to answer us again. So thank you. And there's this from Timila, collaboration with my organization is necessary, building sustainable democracy and leadership. So on behalf of the Nigerian Network and Campaign for Peace Education, I say thank you to everybody, and please keep in touch, and we'll have another webinar next month. Thank you, and have a lovely day. So good morning in the US, good afternoon in Nigeria, good evening in Europe, or wherever you might be. Have a nice evening, have a nice morning, and have a nice day. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.